so far and what's going on more recently in my research, where I try to introduce open knowledge on the US food systems to support decision making. All right. Right. I think this is pretty elementary for everyone in the audience, but of course, for a brief introduction, we all know that agri-food supply chains are essential, right? These systems usually have three major components to it: production of the commodities, processing of these commodities, and then consumption of these commodities. And along each step, we have this multi-scale and multi-mode transportation infrastructure that are supporting the distribution of commodities from one stage to the other. So my research more heavily focuses on understanding this distribution patterns, bringing more detailed information about how does the food transit from one stage to the other. And these are some of the research questions that I will answer in detail today. First one is, well, the question we're trying to answer is, what are the spatial trends through time in the agri-food transportation networks? So this was a study where we try to understand the temporal food flows between the US counties. And we were thinking that US government does a really good job on collecting and publishing data, right? We have this freight analysis framework data. They're publishing it once every 5 years, but it tells us which mode and which food commodity moves, and also gives us the information on amount and dollar in terms of. And these FAF regions are usually dividing states between their rural and more urban areas. So even though we have 50 states, it gives us more detailed information, movement of food across commodities and across transportation modes between 132 regions. But this data gets collected once every 5 years. And again, we were thinking, if you want to have more information about local community food access, how does it differ for different food commodities, or like local transportation infrastructure support in food systems, we need more detailed information. So our goal was, can we downscale this information to food movement between over 3,000 counties in the United States. So this was a heavily data-driven framework, the food flow model. Very briefly, our input data was government collected FAF flow. And we will use logistic regression to understand which variables to what degree influence whether a link exists between two FAF zones or not. And then once that connection structure, binary information, yes, a link exists, no, a link doesn't exist, information is mirrored with the empirical data, then we will implement gamma regression this time to estimate what is the maximum amount or the capacity on each link in terms of carrying the food amounts. Once we determine almost over 9 million links, whether they exist or not, and if they do exist, what is the capacity of food they can carry, then at that point we had to bring some like practical intuition into it, right? Not all of those 9 possible million links are gonna be utilized, right? So among those sets, which ones make more sense that we expect them to kind of deliver food between counties. And in that case, we thought about number one, there should be a mass balance, right? What is leaving the counties summed up together cannot exceed what is leaving the FAFSA that encapsulates them. So there should be a limit on how much counties can send out. Same thing for how much counties can intake. And then we also thought, since we're talking about perishable goods, practitioners would prioritize shorter distances, right? Over those 9 million links, if two counties, one has the supply, the other one has the demand, probably the ones closer to each other will first transport the food to each other in order to minimize the time these commodities spend along the route. And then at the end of this simple linear programming approach, we obtained our output data, which is food movement between 3,000 counties. And this is what it looks like. So here, since we're looking into temporal trends, we run this model individually for 2007, 2012, 2017, and for seven commodities, one by one. And we realized that over the last decade, the spatial trends are not actually that different, right? We see that the majority of food movement is accumulated around the Midwest, especially Mississippi River, because we were not differentiating across modes in here. And we see Los Angeles participating, East Coast, and Florida being big food movers in the United States. The first row is what the government recorded and shared, and the second row is what did we estimate based on trying to kind of like mirror those trends. And our results also show that over the 10 years, similar to the FAF trends, county level food movement will not be that different from each other. And Mississippi Midwest being the major hubs of food intakers or food senders. Here we also wanted to look like what is the net food movement, right? Which are the ones that are major suppliers, which are the ones that are major consumers of food commodities through time. Again, the first row is what the government reported. That's just empirical data. If it's darker red, it means that those places are supplying more food than they are consuming. And if it is dark blue, it means that those places are consuming or intaking more food than they are sending out. At the fab level, we see like there is a good difference in like Midwest, especially being our food basket, major supplier over time. And the main consumers are more of the states we can say they have big metropolitan areas compared to the US, rest of the US. The second row is what did we estimate for the counties over time. The difference is still visible, but not as strong as the FAF level, given it is a finer resolution. But we again see that Midwest being more heavily red and major metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Houston, Seattle, counties that contain that large urban areas are all highlighted in blue in our case as well. And finally, we wanted to see the 2012 Corn Belt drought. How did our estimates capture that? To what degree? So here we compared what was the cereal grain movement looking like compared to 2007 and 2012. Purple ones are the links that are observing a decrease in the amount of cereal grain being moved. And the green is the ones that are seeing an increase in the amount of cereal grain moved when we compare the 2012 with 2007. Again, the first row is what the government reported. That's just empirical data. And we see that majority of the decrease in the amount of food being moved is around the Midwest and Mississippi River, which was like the main breadbasket of the US. And increases around California and Texas. So they were picking up the slack in terms of supply being lost during the Corn Belt drought in the Midwest, and they were contributing more to our grain supply. And the second row is what it looks like in our estimations at the county level. Again, we see Texas, California having heavily green, those counties around there contributing more supplies. But Midwest and along the Mississippi River is where we're seeing the majority of the decreases. Since we do not have a ground truth at the county scale, this was with our way of, okay, I think we can trust our findings, our estimates at the county scale, and we can introduce this data to the literature. But recently, FAST started their county level data, the collection for the first time. But I think if I need to look into it in detail, that is also estimate. It's not an empirical data yet, but comparing our estimates with what the FAF is estimating is something that is currently on the pipeline that we're working on. All right. So once we produce this data, of course, the second question that came to our mind was, okay, we have this network data available, but where are the critical components? What are the most important counties, FAF zones for different food commodity transportation? Where are the bottlenecks? So if anything happens to one location, that's going to kind of cause a national level food distribution crisis, so that we can be better prepared or think about prioritizing which regions, agri-food sector in which locations for future disruptions. So with that in mind, we wanted to identify the choke points of US agri-food supply chains. Again, this is based on distribution trends, not production, but distribution of the food. So we develop a network component importance framework. Again, this is heavily data driven. We had three different definitions of what can be a choke point for a supply chain. Number one, we thought the one that is the most connected. Number two, we thought it's more central in the network. And number three, if that choke point is not in the system, in the entire network, the efficiency and the resilience will be downgraded heavily. So we thought across the three criteria, we used some network metrics. We introduced some, we used some from the existing literature, and identify what are the top 10 locations under each criteria. And then the common ones across three criteria we identified as these are the choke points, these are the ones that are most connected, most central, and contributing the most to the efficiency and resiliency of food distribution. So this is what it looks like for the 2017 data. If we think all agri-food commodities are aggregated, so there's no differentiation across food commodities, this is what it will look like. The first column is the FAF scale choke points. The second one is what did we see at the county level choke point. And we see both of them are spatially aligning, and they are mainly urban areas, relatively high GDPs, high populations. They have international ports in them. And the last figure on the right is actually the logistics sector revenue heat map. So we are seeing that the choke points in our food distribution networks align with the regions that have the most active and compared to the nation more larger logistics sector. So the revenues are higher in those places. But we then thought, okay, US is a very large country. Each region is specialized in producing different types of commodities, food commodities, right? So those patterns, how do they impact the distribution of different food commodities? So we wanted to break it down, this analysis for each commodity one by one. We see SATG1 as live animals and fish. SATG is cereal grains, where we see majority of the most central, most connected, most efficiency and resiliency influencing locations accumulated around the corn belt. SATG3 is fruits and vegetables. 4 is animal feed. SATG5 is meat and their preparation. SATG6 is milk goods, baked goods, and SATG7 is all other processed food. So we see that for the commodities that we can say they're not processed, they're more raw, just agriculture production like 1, 2, 3, and 4. We kind of see wherever the production is more specialized in, choke points are more heavily located in there. But in 5, 6, 7, and when all of them are aggregated together, we see more like a nationwide distribution, because then the impacts of food processing industry is taking place. And we wanted to take a closer look into it. So we picked one unprocessed raw commodity, SCTG2 cereal grains, and one more processed food, SCTG7, all prepared food commodities. And we wanted to compare how what these choke points correspond to the production, the agricultural production trends, and food processing, food manufacturing industry revenue trends. So for the cereal grains, we see that FAF scale choke points and count scale choke points, and these correspond to with the agricultural production trends. So this darker red means there is a larger amount of cereal grain being produced in that area. We were actually surprised about the Idaho being here, and then we looked into it, and there is a railroad crossing that connects East Coast to West Coast, and it passes through Idaho. So that is the connection part, what makes Idaho as a choke point in terms of the distribution of cereal grains. We realized that after looking into more mode specific data. For the more prepared food, we see that choke points are distributed around the nation more homogeneously for FAF and county scale. And the orange heat maps tell us the revenue of food manufacturing industry. So more urban regions, they have more active and dynamic food manufacturing industry, and they kind of determine how the processed food will be distributed within the nation. And in case one of those regions, the food manufacturing industry is hit hard, then we're thinking about there is a nationwide inability to access the processed food we're observing here. And finally, of course, since we had data for multiple years, we wanted to see, okay, these choke points we identified for 2017, are they consistent through time, or do we see once every 5 years some changes in how food is being distributed in the United States? If it is darker shaded, it means that that location is ranked at top 10 continuously every year for every criteria we are considering. So we realized that actually the distribution patterns of the food systems in the US is pretty consistent. Similar places are always the most connected, most central, and contributing the most to the efficiency and resiliency of food distribution. And it is consistent across spatial scales. So we thought this is actually a positive finding if we really wanted to go to a policymaker or decision maker to say, hey, these are the places we think you should prioritize because it doesn't change that frequently. And in case one of a disruption happens in the transportation, logistics, or food sector in one of those geographic locations, we're thinking it's not going to be a local or a regional problem, but more of a national impacts we will see. One of our collaborators in this paper was had like a sabbatical with the White House once we finished this paper, and he was really trying to show our results to them to see if we can get any like government support or any confirmation on our findings. But still, we're waiting to hear any word back. Okay, all right. So after we introduce this new data and identify where are the critical locations of it, we still wanted to think in more practical way. Everything we have generated, analyzed so far was like a bird's eye view of what food distribution looks like, right? It was just like this um not solidified network structure. So we wanted to see, okay, can we actually map this onto the real world transportation infrastructure? So when I say this is the most critical transportation route, can I actually pinpoint a highway segment or a railway segment, which we think would be more valuable if you're thinking about policy and decision making down the road? So with this idea in mind, the last question we wanted to address was how does the critical infrastructure support agri-food transportation? And here we introduce a QGIS and R crosswalk. And it was a data science, network science, and geographic information science unified framework. Again, US government shares the shape files of what the highways, railways, and waterways look like spatially in the United States. We wanted to convert that into a spatially located network so that we can map the FAF level food movement mass information onto it and identify what is the actual agri-food load on each highway, railway, and waterway segment in the United States. So first we looked into, like so far we did not differentiate across transportation modes, but here we wanted to see what is the contribution of each mode to the distribution of different food commodities and different food flow types. We realized that, of course, highways are critical. Every food commodity takes at least one part of their path along the highways. And someone told me a statistic, I'm still trying to confirm that. They said 65% of the trucks we see on the highways are for food transportation in the United States. So that is a statistic I'm still trying to confirm. But when we think about the bulk movement of agri-food commodities, especially cereal grains and agricultural products here, because it contains soybeans, we see railway and waterway actually participating a larger percentage of food movement. Once we think about the different types of food flows, like food produced domestically and consumed domestically versus produced abroad but imported in the US for consumption versus produced here but exported to be consumed abroad, we see again highways are highly crucial, but especially for the domestic food movement. That's kind of like the backbone of carrying all food commodities. Now we wanted to look into more like a spatially finer information. Here we compared different food flow types with different transportation modes. And this is what the total food movement in terms of amount that is taking place on this transportation mode for each FAFSA. So we see that when the distribution of domestically produced and consumed food along the highways, we see Midwest is where majority of food is moving around. Rail, it is again the same. The railways around the Midwest carries majority of the food. And of the waterways, of course, the Mississippi Riverbed does a majority of that food transportation for the commodities we produce in the US and want to consume in the US. But if we're thinking about food that we produce here and exporting outside, we see the highways that are connecting Port of New Orleans to the rest of the US. They're accumulating majority of the food. And then railways between US and Mexico, that is the part where we're seeing a lot of food movement. And of course, waterways, Port of New Orleans is where a majority of our food export is happening. For the imports, we see this time highways along the US-Mexico border. A lot of the fruits and vegetables we are importing from the South America, we see that highways along that border is carrying majority of the load. When we're talking about rail, it is the railways between Canada and US because we are importing cereal grains from Canada as well, and they mainly move through rail. And for the waterways, we see that ports around the Los Angeles being highlighted as the highest food carrying regions because import of food, fruits and vegetables from China is what this data is telling us, why those locations are being highlighted as the highest food movers. And now after this like large aggregated analysis, now we wanted to go into like literally path, road segment. Can we also show that? And this is what it looks like. So these are the real highway, railway, and waterway paths in the United States. This is our real infrastructure. And the color and the width of that road segment is determined by how much food they carry. For the domestic, we can see Mississippi River is taking the food from the Midwest and distributing along the Mississippi River bed, and from there, they're being distributed with highways to the rest of the US. For the export, as we said, that highway paths that bring everyone into the port of New Orleans, that's where the agri-food accumulation happens along the highways, and from there, they're loaded onto barge and ships, and then they're being sent abroad. And finally, for the import, as we said, highways are pretty important. They're carrying the majority of the food when they're on the US and Mexico border because that's where we get majority of our fruits and vegetables which require temperature control truck movement. Once we saw that, then we also wanted to compare like there are very common three supply chain goals, right? Being cost efficient, being resilient, and minimizing carbon emission during the distribution, right? So we wanted to see across modes, how do these goals balance? Um, for the total cost, it was like distance, time, how much food is being distributed times for each mode we had like a unit cost we adapted from the literature. It was similar for the carbon dioxide emission, same calculation. For resilience, we thought about two different ideas. First one was the adaptability. We wanted to see which transportation mode has more alternate routes. In case the main route that we're always carrying the food is disrupted for some reason, do we have alternate routes that we can still connect the origin to the destination? Once we think about that, of course, highways turned out to be the most resilient transportation mode, right? We can think about 10 more paths if we wanted to, if we're okay with spending more time and more gas, we can still go to from one place to the other if our main shortest path is disrupted. But for rail, it is more restricted, and for water, unfortunately, if the Mississippi River is blocked, and we see it a lot because of the climate change where the river height decreases, barges come to a complete stop. That is the time where we're unable to move any food through waterways. So they're really, really reliant on that one single component connection path, unfortunately. But if you think about cost and emission, waterways are the cheapest and the cleanest way of distributing food. Whereas highways, they emit the most carbon in addition to the transit. They also require additional fuel and emits more emission to keep the truck cool enough for the food commodities. And also they cost a lot to distribute food. We also looked at diversity as another resilience definition. Here, we wanted to see among all the distribution available paths to distribute food, are they contributing equally in terms of the load of agri-food they carry? Or even though there are tens of other alternate routes we can take, 100% of the agri-food load is actually being transported in a single route. So if it is more diverse, our idea was that, again, in case that just one path is disrupted, the unmet demand would be relatively less, right? If 10 paths all carrying 10% of the total mass and one of them is disrupted, we can still be okay in terms of supply and demand balance. But if we have 10 alternate routes, but we're actually sending 100% of the agri-food from one supply to the demand through a single path, well, that adaptability actually doesn't being used in this case, right? So we also want to compare that diversity. And similar to the adaptability results, we see highways more evenly carry food along the existing routes, where waterways, Mississippi River does 80% of the mass movement in the entire waterway food transit. So this kind of like a trade-off between cost and resilience and sustainability and resilience, it kind of make us think about what if we can tell practitioners to somewhat optimize according to one objective, what would it look like? So in another study, in a more recent study that has been published, we wanted to see how can we balance the efficiency, sustainability, and resilience of food distribution only for grain commodities. Here we only choose grain because for certain commodities you can actually not think of any other way than highways, right? You need the temperature control trucks. But cereal grains, we carry a lot of them in terms of amount, and they're pretty durable, so you can carry them in water, rail, and through truck anyways. So if you can reduce some part of their truck transit, you can save a lot on carbon emission. So that was kind of our idea on why we think cereal grains can be a good case study. So we see that in the first column that if we want the lowest cost option to transit uh, multiple grain commodities across modes, this is what it will look like. Of course, waterways, when we have the means to move food, Mississippi River will do majority of the way the job, but we should also focus a lot on the rail. We can increase our attention on rail for food movement. If we want highest adaptability, in that case, we should focus on highways, right? Those are the ones with the alternate paths. Each path can carry similar amounts of cereal grains. So in case one of the path is disrupted, we're still okay. We can still manage meeting supply with the demand. Lowest emission is pretty similar to the cost. Again, prioritize waterways and railways. And last column is actually what the empirical case is looking. So we're seeing that even for like very durable, non-perishable almost commodities, cereal grains, we are heavily using highways in this case. And I want to point one thing out. So this is FAF data. So it is from almost like state to state food transit. This does not take into last mile or inner city distribution. So still from sending food from one state to one state, this is how much we're relying on highways for bulk commodities. So that was one thing we were saying. We're not saying eliminate inner city or last mile delivery, but if you're sending it from one state to the other, why can now we do more with rail? Because it was there. We checked, like we can connect every FAF zone to each other through rail. The connection is there. It's just how we and how much we operate them was what we were trying to highlight here. And since we were thinking about multiple grains, we wanted to see what is the contribution of each grain to these transportation patterns. And I'm sure, as everyone can assume, corn was the one dominating a lot of our results, right? So all the cereal grain movement, we were mainly talking about corn movement. Any change we were thinking about, it was how and through which mode you transport corn is the major decision that you might need to make if you want it to be more cost efficient, more sustainable, or more adaptable in the scenario. The rest of the cereal grains were not, in terms of mass, were they really almost insignificant to make any real change in terms of those supply chain goals. All right, so this was what have been done so far. Currently, for some ongoing work in the US food supply chains, what I'm working on with my students is we're trying to identify where is the highest food availability for consumption is at final resolution, and how do those trends correspond to food waste and food insecurity. So is there like an inequity in terms of food access to food that is available for consumption? That is one question we are trying to answer right now. We are trying to extend this last study into each commodity one by one. So now we can see, right, these are the highway routes for the distribution of entire agri-food commodities together. But how does the trends and patterns look differently for different food commodities? We all think more knowledge, more finer data will help us to make better informed decisions. And finally, we're trying to see impacts of COVID across food supply chain stages for different commodities, for different regions, for future preparedness that can be more tailored for across commodities and states and production versus consumption versus processing, because not all of them were equally impacted during the COVID. And I also work on some about the global food supply chains. Here I'm trying to see what is the diversification of supplies for cereal grains imports of low income and food insecure nation. Usually, when there is a disruption in the global scene, those are the ones that are being the most vulnerable and losing majority of their food affordability and availability. So, what can be some diversification strategies that they can think of? Also, given the current trends, who should we expect to be the future leading nations of agri-food exports? And finally, what is the risk dynamics of cereal grain trade if we think individual importers versus global scale import trends? These are all aimed at the same question. If we have more knowledge, finer detailed information, we can do better decisions that collectively ensure more resilient food systems and better food security for globally. Thank you for listening. That's all I have. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Denise. Really appreciate your talk. There were a couple of questions in the chat from
Okay.
Rob, yeah, from Rob Franzo. And Rob, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions, that'd be great. Or I did pull them out too. I can ask them if you prefer.
No, that's fine. So Denise, excellent job. Obviously, this is a really important topic around food security and given the dynamics going on. So, firstly, the source of your data is principally from government sources. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. For the US level, we use freight analysis framework data. US Department of Transportation Bureau of Transportation Statistics publishes that data. For the global food supply chain, I use FAO stats and UN Comtrade data.
Thank you for that. That's obviously with what's happening right now and the disruption worldwide. There's a question about the ability to continue getting that data. The reason I'm a practitioner in the commercial sense, looking at technology and what I call phygital, which is physical digital, and then I talk about data twins and using machine learning and algorithms to do analysis, right? Trustworthy data is key. But the point specifically is one of the this initiatives around like IFCO, Tosca, some of the fresh produce and other commercial providers. One of the things I talk to them about is how do we do data in exchange, real-time data interchange, and aggregate these data so that real-time decisions can be made, much along the lines of what the research is doing. Have you looked at commercial sources and brokers for data?
In terms of distribution, I have not looked into any commercial data, but for this food available to consume study, right now we are trying to use the KILTS, University of Chicago Nielsen KILTS data. I believe they have information on how much food is purchased, like scanner data from all grocery stores, and the grocery stores are providing that data to the University of Chicago Bank. So that has been the only data I had any familiarity with in terms of coming from private entity and not government.
Okay, well, thank you. No, that's helpful for me because I'm really keen. There's some really interesting innovations taking place that I think
Mhm.
it will be very interesting to see. And my last question, I'm very familiar with Esri from a GIS point of view. Are you building your own tools in your digital twin, what I call a digital twin, or is it proprietary or are you using open standard platforms?
We are completely using open platforms.
Okay,
QGIS, all the built-in functions. We are just bringing together like a workflow. After you do this, this is the
great.
output, implement this on, but all the functions and everything open source. We are not like no embargo or anything. So the study that we're doing right now to what would the food distribution patterns look like for different food commodities, we are again using built-in functions in QGIS. That paper is currently in review. Hopefully, once it's published, all the source will be available and open on our end.
Thank you for that. That's really my questions. Did you have any questions for me? I'm just kidding.
Not right now, but thank you so much for the interest. I really appreciate it. Any other questions did I miss?
I think so. Um,
Oh, for the commodities, I think there is a question. Right. So the commodities, we are using whatever the US Census Bureau divided as the SCTGs. SCTG 1 to 7, as I mentioned in one of the studies, it goes from live animals to all processed food. We are unable to have individual food type information yet. So, like, we can have all cereal grains, but if you ask me, like, how did you divide that corn, barley, wheat in the last study you show, we took the production percentages. So we said in a FAF zone, from all the cereal grain production, if 80% of it corn, where the production data is available from USDA, we thought all the food outflows coming from that region, we would assume there is this like perfect mix. 80% of it will be corn. That's how we were able to break it down to individual food types. Unfortunately, that data is not available, but a CTG 1 to 7, we analyze them all.
Um,
Mm.
I had a little follow-up to that. So my understanding, though, is that a lot of people grow corn for to feed their own animals. And so
Mhm.
you might be overestimating how much corn is actually moving through the system because it's not really moving, it's just staying on farm for animals.
Oh, that's a great question. So for the part where we say we were modeling that food distribution part, we specifically did not wanted to look into that self loop, as we say, because we thought exactly the same thing that you were saying. Okay, they're producing this corn, but probably is going to become maybe a CTG for animal feed for them, right? But if they're moving it to a different place, a different FAFSON, we assumed, okay, that is a movement that we need to address. But self loops, we did not include them, as you said, because we were not able to track down what is the transition of that commodity into another will be.
Was it by FAFSA or by county, the self-looping?
The last one was FAFSON. It
Okay.
was not by county. The last one was FAFSON. Um, for the county, we tried to do this at the county level. Like, can we actually map like county to county movement on real world infrastructure? Computational powers was our limitation, unfortunately. We were not able to do that. But yeah, that's why we were only able to do it at FAFSA.
Do you know how corn for ethanol is counted in the system? Is it included in the SCTG numbers, or do they separate it out somehow?
I did not see Census Bureau separating it. I just see corn. I think it comes down to how the NICIS codes are being assigned. I think there is a different, like only the NICIA codes start with 3-1 are processing food commodities as to keep them as food commodities, right? If corn becomes an ethanol, that is a different NICS code is associated with that process. So for the processing, food processing industry, we only wanted to limit ourselves with the ones start with 3-1. So that was our way of kind of trying to eliminate corn becoming ethanol from our processing data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there
Anyone
any?
else?
Would it be? I think someone asked for my paper. I will be happy to share it. Uh, would it be okay if I send you as an email, Michelle, and then you can
Yeah,
just
sure.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. All right. Thank you. And I also want to thank you for the shout out to the latest paper, the shocks on agri-food system. Thank you for that. We were really excited. FAF finally published annual data, not once every 5 years. And we were so eager to, okay, now we need to do annual county estimates and what does it look like. So that paper does that. How does the annual county food movement look like rather than once every 5 years? And this big during that 2000 2018 to 2023, there were like big shocks happening, like the COVID, the floods, the droughts. We wanted, and the trade war with the China. We wanted to see if they were impacting county to county food movement across these different disruptions. We also had one when we first did it for the FAF level. I think it was eye-opening, and then we wanted to do, okay, since the data is available, we should do that for the county too. But yeah, maybe for another talk. I will be happy to talk about it more.
I have another question if no one else is going to jump in. So I was really interested in USDA's transportation dashboard data. They've got weekly data for food movements across the country in, I think, mostly truck transportation. And I'm wondering if you or you know of anyone who's been thinking about using those data in combination with some of these other data sources to understand in particular how produce is moving?
Hmm, that's a good question. In terms of truck or produce, I have not heard anyone looking into it, but I know a colleague who is looking at the barge movement from the USDA. And I think USDA provides, as you said, weekly, right? I think they were able to develop their own software, which was tracking daily the barge movement in the US for corn movement.
Mhm.
I'm happy to share their information if you think it will be useful. But yeah, in terms of truck and produce, no, I have not heard anyone doing that. But it sounds interesting.
Yes, definitely. It looks like Rob has another question.
Yes.
Well, I put it in the chat, but just talking about papers, but given that you outlined your model being open source and available, are you intending to actually make it available through a portal so that people can actually do their own inquiries and mashups and analysis? I know there's, obviously a lot of considerations to the cost of doing that, but I was just curious.
Right. So we currently have this foodflows.org, which
Ah,
gives us our estimates in like a portal. You can download it. It's like an interactive map. You can play with it. But in term, the code is not
no,
available.
no,
It's just the results.
yeah, no, that's perfect. That's
Okay, awesome.
actually addressed my question. This is exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
Have you
And I
thought about
apologize if I missed that.
posting code on GitHub?
So the one that I'm right now trying to do with this individual commodity transportation patterns, yes. Once the papers, hopefully fingers crossed, acceptance, GitHub is going to be open in the GitHub. But until the review process, it's just for reviewers to see it. Yeah. And then also the one where we're trying to understand what are the factors that determine how is food available to consumption moves in the US and how does it correspond to waste and insecurity. That is also something in submission. Once it's open, the code is going to be open in the GitHub as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think we should share more our results and code. I mean, when I was a student, it was really beneficial for me when I was able to have open access to data and code. So that's something I really try to pass it along.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments from anyone that's still with us? Well, thank you, Denise. I really appreciate it. It was an excellent
Thank you
talk
so much.
and really thought-provoking work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invite and the interest. Happy to do more. Let me know.
Awesome. We'll be putting together a short summary and posting the video from this talk at both the Center for Integrated Ag Systems um, um, site as well as the Icicle website. So if you want to go back and look at it again, you'll find it there. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.